What sort of, did you give anybody any inspiration or something?
Well, I mean, I felt it would be like looking at a Xerox of a Xerox if I went to films that were inspired off of Carter.
Sure,
That didn't seem to make sense to me.
Right.
I mean, it's my belief that this is DNA all off the same tree. You can be in the same world and watch Avatar one night, Star Wars another night, John Carter another night, and hopefully you don't feel like you're necessarily that derivative. They all feel like they're just branches off of healthy roots. I felt more like, okay, I knew I wanted the tone of this film to be as historically authentic as possible, even though all of it's fiction. Because I felt that was the way in. Because these books, when you read them, or at least this is how I took it when I read them, I didn't read them as sci-fi. I didn't read them for as fantastical and the fact that it's on Mars. I read them as, this is an era where these books are written where the world's been mapped. Earth has all been mapped, and all the Columbus finding a new world and finding a new country and meeting a new culture has kind of been done. There's very little left, and people still want that. There's this human desire to meet another culture and another race and make new connections, and so they just broadened it out to a planet and just made them up. But it was for the same desire, I think. So that's always how I read the book. It might as well be, change Carter with Columbus and change, Barsoom with a new world, and that's what it felt like to me. So I felt like, then let's make it feel like that. Let's make it feel like it's of that time period, turn of the century, and it is just going to a new continent we didn't know about. And what led me onto that? Basically, that motive. What was your question?
It was about inspiration.
Oh yeah, and that's what made me look at movies that made me feel like that. So I would look at cliche, I know, but it's my favorite movie in the world. It's the ultimate desert film. I looked at Lawrence of Arabia a lot. I looked at Last Emperor because of this big, dying, massive scope of the Forbidden City. I just felt like there was something about that I wanted these desert red men cities to feel like. And we looked at Outlaw Josie Wales. We looked at Jeremiah Johnson. Again, all these things had a sense of historical truth that they were leveraging off of, that they had done research off of and were building off of. And I just wanted this to feel the same way as best we could.
And is that why everything looked futuristic but vintage at the same time?
Well, yeah, I was never trying to make anything futuristic. I was just trying. But the rub is, how do you make something look old and of an older culture, but their very fundamentals may not have been based off of our fundamentals. They didn't have, the same maybe beginnings of how writing started or how the wheel was formed. And so I said we had to think of things like doorknobs and windows. Like, you can't, if they look like our doorknobs or windows, then that means it's Earth and now we're making it up. Mm-hmm. And so my production designer, Nathan Crowley, had this fantastic idea of like going modern with his thinking of how you could rethink these things, and then going backwards with the modern discovery and making it feel old. And so we thought of things like levelers for doors and for windows, and we and no knobs and getting rid of wheels whenever even though wheels made sense for maybe they weren't applied for the exact same thing, and just all that kind of stuff. So it would have this hopefully older feel, but not exactly our rules of history, which is cool to say, really tough to do, and it will always be haunted by that with each. If we do more, we'll always be haunted by how to redefine that.
That especially works with the flying machines because they look so much like they're Greek Argonaut kind of machines. And
my thing was master and commander to the sky. I said there's something about the turn of the century, like the back end of the 1700s into the 1800s, where before the Industrial Revolution kicked in, everything was so manual labor. It was very labor intensive, and you could pretty much look at it. Even the first car, you could look at it and figure out how it works. And I said that puts you in a certain place in time in history of man with us. So let's do that with any of the things that are going on in Mars. If you look at it, you can see the moving parts, and you can see there's no automation, or there's very little. It's very rudimentary automation if there is, and it's people. Pushing and pulling stuff. We did used to go into it, but it just slowed the film down. But we do pull from the books is that they had one thing in the equivalent like we do with coal. They had stuff called radium, which is just sort of like having coal, but it's radioactive, and it kind of it's like having your own spark plug to just start stuff. And that's what the not that I expect anybody to know, but that's what the Tharks shoot with. They sort of have this little phosphorescent sort of spark when they hit, like flint. And that is like sort of their initial thing that just allows them to have a little bit of what you would call electricity to start playing with things. These kind of things you start worrying, because I've had to deal with this on many other animated films where you're making up a world, and they can take up a year or two just trying to come up with what those rules are. So I was really lucky that there was so much of that stuff in the books, and you really just had to figure out a way to visually make it interesting, so that you'd kind of get it. Because I didn't want to spend time explaining it. I just wanted you to just kind of get it,
There were a few departures from the books.
All the time.
What was your hardest thing to adapt?
Well, I didn't think about it that way. What I do, and it's no different than if it was an original story, is you almost, sounds silly, but you almost make a grocery list of all the things that you think are interesting and cinematic and dramatic. And you're so with a book, I was like underlining, love this scene, love that line, love that moment, love this character, and you just like make this list. And then you kind of hang it like ingredients in a kitchen. And then you go, okay, now I'm going to make a story that's interesting and not worry about whether I'm making that story. But the basics of it are the same. I want a guy that's a stranger in a strange land that's going to find out that he's more human in Mars than he is on Earth. And that's it, right? And so, okay, I got that spine. And then you just start pulling from these things and putting them in places that service that. And that's no different than what you do with an original story. And when the dust settled, we found that, wow, we have much more of the book than we thought we would be throwing away. And it actually pretty much feels like the book. So I almost feel like I went in and did chiropractic adjustments and some key edits and just some key inclusions of things that I knew were coming from other books, which I had the luxury of, and just introduced them earlier and just allowed to make a much more solid 3-act movie, It was fun. It was actually fun to do, because usually I have to make all that crap up.